Well, we're back again with a full review for Summer Ieyasu. One of our first limited summer adventurers, let's take a deep dive into his kit, how he plays out, and how to kit him out for the sea. As always, my name is Xenozillus, and let's get straight to it. Ieyasu's first skill is Unrelenting Waves, a skill shift skill that readies itself when cast in Phase 1 and 2. Its base effect is 900% damage across 2 hits, with Phase 2 adding an 80% chance to inflict bleed, and Phase 3 adding Frostbite and a Dispel. This skill is also shareable for 7 skill share points, which will use the Phase 3 variant. Bleed, Frostbite, and Dispel for a single cast, which is pretty useful. Since shared skills aren't really used for Bleed, treat it as a Dispel with Frostbite tacked on, which might even enable some weird off-element Frostbitten Punisher builds. This skill can essentially be simplified into 2700% damage across 6 hits, inflicting 2 stacks of Bleed, Frostbite, and a Dispel, which is a lot in one skill. While you'll generally spam all 3 charges as quickly as you can, you might occasionally want to stagger timing to match iframes, to lasers against the twins, or to iframe Lilith's red telegraphs. Since it's essentially a skill that wants to be cast 3 times in a row, it's also pretty slow to push through entirely, though at least you have the freedom of picking when. Ieyasu's second skill is Wormgrace Wave, dealing 2100% damage or 2520% against bleeding targets. This also grants Strength Amp every other cast. The bleed conditional is fairly easy to meet as long as you have decent uptime and are spamming your S1. Ieyasu's bleed uptime is good, unless you've managed to hit the 1 in 25 chance of failing to land a bleed through your entire S1, or you've just finished dealing with a mechanic that causes you to lose uptime, such as Lilith's Sweet Circle, or any of the twins mechanics where they decide they're going to float in the air for a few days. Otherwise, it's rare for you to have an S2 available without an S1 or having cast an S1 recently, since the SP costs are only a few hundred points apart. Spam S2 when it's up, but prioritize S1 to make sure bleed is on the boss. Don't bother holding S2 for bleed, as the amount of SP and potential strength amp progress wasted will quickly turn into lost damage throughout the course of the fight. Of course, sometimes you'll naturally end up delaying skills due to having to handle mechanics, avoiding animation lock, and only standard attacking. There are exceptions to everything, so don't worry about doing perfect DPS if the alternative is to die and ruin a run. The rest of Ieyasu's kit is fairly simple: extra crit rate against bleeding targets and extra crit damage, making him a particularly crit heavy sword, echoing his first blade incarnation. Stun resist makes him handy for our current endgame as well. In terms of overall viability, Ieyasu's okay for twins. He works well for chewing through the overdrive bar during Berserk and puts out fairly decent damage, but he stalls out in terms of contribution when it comes to hit count mechanics. If you already had Lapis or Gala Masculine, then you already had the roster potential to clear the fight and go up, but Ieyasu at least brings a new, novel way to experience the fight. When it comes to Sinister Dominion, however, I think Ieyasu is potentially top tier. His kit doesn't particularly rely on buffs, excluding his Chainco ability, which is pretty minor, but with more strength amp support he'll deal both high DPS under the Curse of Nihility, while also boosting his team's DPS by a significant amount. If we start seeing more players using Summer Marishiten, then this will improve even more. Overall, in terms of weapon archetype and resists, he sits between Eugene and Xander. Given that Eugene was ignored during the 2.0 rebalance and thus lost his niche of high reward for casting S1 3 times, that leaves Xander, or maybe Halloween Odetta if you're particularly spicy. Xander still beats out Ieyasu in terms of raw damage if your team is appropriately set up to abuse double buffs, but Ieyasu should easily overtake Xander's damage in Sinister Dominion content. As for setups, there's 2 prints that should be a given: Sword Skill Damage and Frostbitten Punisher. The rest of the prints will come down to a bit of personal preference and how comfortable you are with fights. For example, you could run Flurry prints for both strength and crit, keeping in mind both twins and Lilith will force disengages, or a Force Strike print for a slightly easier time in Berserk phase twins. Bleeding Punisher could also be an interesting option since enemies don't build resistance to bleed, but it is slightly weaker than your typical Affliction Punisher prints. Of course, we'll see this change quite a bit once Water unlocks their Sinister Dominion slots, but that's a given. In the grand scheme of things, Ieyasu is a strong contender for a future Sinister Dominion fight that leads with water units. Even in solo, AI should pilot him relatively well as his kit isn't terribly complex. Frankly, you could roll your face on your screen and still do decent damage with Ieyasu. He's that simple. And that's about it for Ieyasu. If you want to see more gameplay or ask me questions directly, drop a comment down below or join me on Twitch. I stream on Wednesdays and Saturdays, 9:30 PM BST. Don't forget, the Dragalia Lost Song Collection giveaway is still running until the 28th of this month. I'll get a link for that prepped in the description and in a comment too. As always, take it easy, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.